It wasn't until about 2 years ago that I started to listen to music via apps such as Spotify or Amazon Music. The cut of federal funding on the music industry, specifically radios and other media held under the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, has taken a primary source of entertainment and education away from students and communities. This take has severely harmed local journalism and reduced access to information consumption. The dissolvement of the Corporation of Public Broadcasting has directly affected over 1,500 local radio stations. In today's political and technological climate, there is a dire need for access to information detached from social medias. Right now, I am at one of the recording studios at 91.3 FM KUWS to discuss the loss of federal funding to U.S. radio and why it has been so devastating, as well as what we as students and community members can do to help. The reason I chose a space like this is because it has that same values that many radio stations have surrounding community information spread, as well as a retention of culture and community and history. In May of 2025, current U.S. President Donald J. Trump issued the Rescissions Act that cut $1.1 billion of federal funding from the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, including $1.16 million that supported stations throughout Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the Dakotas. For example, let's take Ampers, a Minnesota radio station corporation that covers 17 radio stations throughout the state. 10 of those 17 radio stations relied on federal funding, anywhere from 15 to 50% of their annual budgets. Along with the Rescissions Act, the president also issued a note to the public titled Ending Taxpayers' Subsidization of Bias Media. The reasoning behind the defunding of the Corporation of Public Broadcasting was allegedly due to political bias, as the stations were seen to be too liberal-leaning, especially stations such as PBS and NPR. And while the title of this note seems to be very inviting to the public, the actual information in it was severely harmful, especially towards smaller communities. And this isn't the first time that something like this has happened. The current US president and political parties have seemed to taken the motive towards voice erasure, even with documents such as Restoring Truth and Sanity to American History, which has effectively erased many historical documents from the digital and physical platforms involving Black history, Native American history, as well as the LGBTQ community. On March 4th of 2026, WDIO interviewed with the Wisconsin Public Radio to discuss the effects that we can expect to see here at home. It was said that the defunding is meant to have an impact that is not felt right away, but may see major changes within the next upcoming years, which can be extremely dangerous because it's not something that is essentially there that we can have that immediate reaction to. It is a very subtle effect that we have to continue to provide funding to these radio stations even after the issue has passed. This was reflected in an article that was published by Business North in Minnesota that pressed that radio has a potential to stay alive and even thrive so long as it figures out how to survive on its own terms, with many people raising the phrase defunded but not defeated as a way to spread encouragement during this time. And while this action was meant to harm corporations, it instead had a larger effect on rural and tribal stations most. While large corporations such as PBS maybe have lost essentially 13% of their federal funding or overall funding, smaller corporations and radios have lost far more. And this affects low-income communities and tribal communities most, as those communities are now having less access to information and education surrounding language, culture, traditions, and truth. And while many people today see this changing world and may not think that radio and public broadcasting are still essential, this is proven wrong. Despite all of this, about 99.7% of the US population still listens to radio to some extent. And radio doesn't just cover music, it covers current events, emergency broadcasts, weather, and so much more. Without access to emergency broadcasts, getting people to emergency situations has now been raised a safety concern with the lack of communication. This also affects elderly and disabled communities who may rely on radio stations in order to feel that sense of community as they are unable to leave their homes. But there's still a heavy push to keep broadcasting alive. Even in the House of Representatives, when the act was being passed, the vote was extremely close, with a vote of 216 to 213, with one representative not there and the other not voting. And as far as what we can do as student and community members goes, it can be very difficult because the primary form of funding for many radio stations is private donations. And with rising gas prices and people having less expendable money, this becomes very difficult. So instead of issuing grants and private donations, one thing that is far easier for us as community members and students to do is to reach out to local and state representatives, expressing your desire and need for local stations. Because while federal funding may be eliminated, local funding is not. And as someone who grew up watching PBS and listening to 99.9 on the radio, seeing these forms of media diminish makes me think of what it'll be like to raise my kids in a world where the truth is it's very meticulously sorted by those who can afford to provide it. Since when did strangers on the internet and AI bots become our most relied on source of information? We need public radio stations to continue to provide real, free, independent, and diverse journalism to all who are willing to listen. And despite the static, there is you. There's our community members, our students, our college students and scholars who are taking advantage of their education in order to help others. And to all who value a good song, this was Charlene Kovarsh. Thank you for tuning in.